You're now listening to Sound Talent Media. Check out more shows at soundtalentmedia.com.
Hey everybody, I'm Chris Fafalius, and I'm the producer of Krista Makes a Podcast and the host of the One Hit Thunder podcast.
And I'm Matt Kelly, host of Horror Movie Night and the producer / the head of content for the Geekscape Podcasting Network.
Between the two of us, we have, believe it or not, 25 years of podcasting experience, and we want to help you start your own podcast.
We know podcasting, and we want to share that knowledge with you.
So whether you're new to podcasting or you want some feedback on your currently active podcast, we want to help.
Or perhaps you're just overwhelmed with all of the editing work. Well, we can help you with that also.
You can check out our website at weknowpodcasting.com for more information.
We're excited to help your podcasting dreams become a reality.
Monday morning feels so bad. Everybody seems to...
The Easybeats formed in 1964 and immediately began to take Australia by storm. But here in the US, we only ever got one single from them, the extremely unique Friday on My Mind. Then, as quickly as they formed, the Easybeats quietly broke up. This week, we're joined by Katie Cole, who lets us know why, despite being a one-hit wonder in the US, the band holds great cultural importance in her home country of Australia.
Be with my girl, she's so pretty. She looks fine tonight. She's all inside to me. I'll spend my friend tonight. I'll leave my head tonight. I've got to get tonight. One hit is all you need to make the money guaranteed, and you can live off royalties forever. And it makes me wonder, is it just a blunder, or is it one hit thunder?
So Katie, this is crazy. I fancy myself a music enthusiast, and I gotta admit right off the bat here, I had never heard of the Easybeats, which you, being from Australia, probably think that's insane, because apparently the Easybeats are to Australia like David Hasselhoff is to Germany, it seems like, because it seems like they're one of the most popular Australian bands of all time. Am I wrong about that?
Well, it's up there. It's one of those, it's a reference band. So they were really one of the first bands, if not the first band, and it may be the first band to basically cross the pond and have international success. So they are definitely a household name, but it's more of that, there's a legacy that comes with them. So it's, you know, I mean, obviously they're not the Beatles, they're not the Stones, they're not the Beach Boys, but it was of the same era. And to come from Australia being such a small population for such a big country, it was a very big deal.
They opened doors, and it seems like they led the way for a lot of other artists. Oh, yeah. And talking about this song first and foremost, this song is wild. Yeah. This song's crazy. You're probably used to you've heard it forever, and it's a normal part of your life, probably hearing it on the radio and everything. But I heard this song for the first time this week in preparation for this episode, and I was like, wow, this song's insane. It is not your run-of-the-mill bubblegum, early, you think of early Beatles songs, and they're very bubblegum pop, major.
Exactly.
This song's insane.
Well, exactly. And that's part of the reason why they were so big, because they were doing things that other bands just weren't doing. And like the way that the guitarists were working together, they were creating a thing that wasn't really established yet. And until you sort of dig into their history and go, oh, that's where they went. Oh, that's why. And they really were just super, super talented. And to me, they definitely were ahead of the curve in every respect, regardless of being from Australia or not.
I got to say that they're pretty punk rock for being a pre-punk rock band. This song alone. First of all, those verses, the minor key, the dissonant leads, the backup vocals of those verses with the do backup vocals. Mm-hmm. Oh my God, it's insane. And when I first heard it, it threw me for a loop that this was a giant song. I mean, I had read that this was by somebody. Who was it? Oh, the Australasian Performing Rights Association, they named this song we're talking about today the best Australian song of all time.
Yeah.
So when I saw that, I was like, wow, we're really going to get into it with this band.
Also on that list that jumped out at me, because I know that one day we will have to cover them as well, but at number 3 was Midnight Oil with Beds Are Burning.
So good. I swore to Mike, because I do a lot of online concerts, because that's what you got right now. That's you're running with it. But like I usually do themed like online concerts on a website called Stage It, and I put a poll together for like, what's my next concert going to be? Is it going to be this or is it going to be this? And my 2 choices were my choice completely, like no request, just I picked the songs, and my other choice was like all Australian. And so my next show coming up is going to be all Australian, and you can bet that Midnight Oil song is going to be on it. And
hell yeah.
Yeah, there's a lot of great Australian rock, but it's, as you probably started to work out after digging into this band, a lot of it stemmed from the Easybeats crossing over and really establishing Australia as a place for rock and roll.
Absolutely. Hey, before we get more into the Easybeats, I got to ask you, you're from Melbourne, right?
Correct.
Is there any sort of Melbourne versus Sydney rivalry when it comes to, because I'm looking at I have a big list of bands and artists that are from Melbourne, and then I have a bunch of bands that are from Sydney. I'll be honest with you, I probably lean Melbourne between the two.
Well, honestly, like it's hard because when you grow up in Australia, it's like, Melbourne versus Sydney or Australia versus New Zealand. And then you move out of the country and then it's like, I don't care.
Right.
Yeah, over here, we don't even know Australia and New Zealand are different places. So.
Well, honestly, if a great song, band, actor, or movie comes out of New Zealand, we'll just claim them as we'll just encompass them like America does with Canada. It just becomes part of the bigger picture, the Borg of music and entertainment.
Yeah, for the listeners, real quick, Melbourne, you guys had Crowded House, Nick Cave and the Bad Seeds, Air Supply, The Living End, Jet, Men at Work, Body Jar, and King Gizzard and the Lizard Wizard. Those were the notable bands that I was like, damn, Melbourne has a lot of good artists. Sydney had the Easybeats, but we'll get into that a little bit further about whether I guess Sydney can claim the Easybeats, but they also have AC/DC, In Excess, Midnight Oil, The Vines, The Divinals, and Frenzal Rom. So I don't know. I would lean Melbourne. I'm on Team Melbourne if we're picking sides, but I get it.
I'm from Melbourne, so it's like I'm always gonna sort of side with with my people. I think it's a weirdly more cultural city, but honestly, like I'm now at that point where I don't even care who came from where. I'm just like, let's just all hug.
Yeah, you're psyched. How long have you been living in the United States?
Yeah, it'll be 10 years now, because I put out my first American EP in 2011, and and if you're counting 2020 as a year.
Yeah, no, not really. Yeah, it's only been 9 then. Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah, so I get what you're saying. Anybody that's coming out of Australia, you can just claim them. There's no Melbourne versus Sydney anymore.
No.
Talking about the Easybeats now, they're from Sydney, of course, but nobody in the band was actually born in Australia.
No, I mean, I always tell people like the origin of all rock and roll is not from Australia, because almost everybody that was born from rock and roll is either English, mostly Scottish, but as you sort of looked into it too, it's like you had someone that was Dutch, some English people, and a couple of Scots. And I mean, that's a really good representation of Australia just in general sense. Like everyone is from everywhere, but everyone's aware of it. So there isn't, it's just like everyone's got weird accents and whatever, and you're just like, ugh.
Yeah, and granted, they all came here as children, and their story is awesome. They lived together in the Villawood Migrant Hostel.
Nice.
Is where all their families lived, and that's where they were young kids, and they started a band. That's a pretty cool story. That I watched some videos of them going back to like the place they grew up, and of course the hostel wasn't there anymore. Kind of an underdog story. I like that.
Yeah.
And I got to ask you, were you a real little kid when you first heard the Easybeats? Was this this was a household song?
It's a household song, and like it's one of those songs that was used in like a ton of commercials, but I'm positive it was used as like a song for like one of the news network, not the news, but like one of the actual major channel network songs as well. Like it was just there. It was always there, and like that, as soon as you heard that sort of octave riff, you knew it was just somebody playing a bit of that or covering a bit of that just from the opening of the song. It was definitely something, it was just there. I grew up and it was just there. It wasn't even a question.
I think it's also one of those things where, in the same vein as something we talked about in the very beginning of the podcast when we did I Don't Like Mondays by the Boomtown Rats.
Yeah.
I feel like if you have a song and a day is in the song title, people are going to jump on that as some type of like, oh, it's Friday. You know, I could see like radio stations just being like, oh, it's Friday. Here's Friday always on my mind. Like,
yeah, no, but it was definitely one of those songs like going into the weekend, and yeah, it was just there. It was just part of the. You know, it's like when you're in Australia, and because like the 60s, 70s, and you know, part of the 80s were really like a big boom for rock and roll, but a big boom for rock and roll coming out of Australia. Like, you just didn't really differentiate between what was Australian and what was international, because the Australian music scene from, like, I grew up in an extremely musical household. My mum is like, I don't even know how to explain the amount of music that she played to me and my sister growing up, but like we were raised on listening to Zeppelin and Woodstock and just everything, like literally everything. So there was always music, but like you were always fed like this sort of equal components of English music and American music, and then there was a good chunk of Australian music in those sort of decades coming through. Obviously not so much. I mean, it's still there, but it's not encouraged and supported the way it was back then. There's just it just isn't, because you're not seeing the amount of bands crossing over the way that they did back then. But the talent was extreme. Like, again, knowing the population of Australia versus America, to have like bands like Midnight Oil and of course AC/DC, which we'll obviously get into with this story as well. But the level of musicianship coming out of Australia was just exceptional. And I don't know, like, it always sort of surprised me, certain bands that didn't quite make it over, or they would go over to the US and have these big showcases. You'd hear all these stories of like these other bands that were in the 80s that didn't quite make it, but you know, yet in excess, you know, crossed, you know, just you hear all these stories, and it's like, it always fascinates me, like, why this band, why this song, why this time? And there's never an answer to it, but Friday on My Mind was the one that got the Easybeats over that line for Australia. And obviously the rest of the world started to go, well, you know, aside from this band and what other songs they had, but they started to look at the rest of Australia and going, well, what else do you have? Like, it became like, not just this far off distant land with strange kangaroos and people. Right. It became like this is a really talented band. What else you got?
Nice.
It almost makes you feel like, of course it's the number one song, like the number one song from Australia. Like it's the same thing as like, it's never a shock to hear, you know, Smells Like Teen Spirit listed as the number one most important song of the 90s, because it's almost like you don't even have a 90s without it, really. Like,
and that's a really great equivalency to say that, because you wouldn't really have sort of this rock music, you know, whether you call it pop or rock or whatever you want to call it, you just wouldn't have that scene without this band being sort of the first to take everyone for that same ride.
Did you know the names of the guys in this band like people know the names of the Beatles and the Rolling Stones and things? Like, did you know Little Stevie? Did you know who Little Stevie was?
No, I knew Stevie Wright, because he went on to have other hits which I don't think crossed over to America as well. Like, he had Evie Part 1, 2 and 3, which it was huge in Australia as well.
I saw stuff about that, yeah.
He was a name. I knew that there were two guys in the band. Like, I knew that one of them was young and someone was something, but like, I didn't even make that connection until it was like, isn't that also young? And then did my homework on obviously not only the songwriting partnership, but their whole production sort of partnership as well, and was just blown away with like this band not only being the one to sort of cross the line internationally, but to establish one of the biggest parts of rock history sort of on the planet. Like, to be involved with that is just absolute insanity, and I wasn't familiar with all of their names. No,
what
not at all.
What a front man. This guy I watched so many live videos of them, and this guy...
huge personality.
Oh my, and they call him Little Stevie. I couldn't get an exact answer on how little he was. And I know compared to the one really big guy who I think was Harry Vonda, he was an extremely tall, blonde Dutch man. And also a sick guitarist, like insanely sick guitarist. But this guy as a lead singer was wild. He had so many awesome moves. It reminded me, honestly, it's funny, it kind of reminded me, I don't know if you've ever seen them live when they were a band, Katie, but the band At the Drive-In, this dude was doing the spins and the convulsing and just crazy jumping off of things, and at the same time singing perfectly. And on top of that, he's a total hunk. I said, this guy literally is like probably like better looking than anybody in the Beatles or the Stones. I seriously, I was looking at him like, damn, that guy's good looking too.
Well, that's the thing about rock stars though. Like he's a good looking guy, but like with rock stars, with what they do and the way they perform and whatever swagger and whatnot they bring to the table, it all convinces you that they're extremely attractive. But when you just look at a picture of Mick Jagger or Roger Daltrey or someone like that, you're just like,
right.
What?
Yeah, I was going to say, Mick Jagger's like the perfect example. Like, if Mick Jagger didn't have the stage presence that he had, there's no way in hell that man would ever be like a heartthrob.
No, it was really amazing. Like, and it was an amazing time for music. Obviously, there were so many bands that were really on the same wavelength with it, whether they knew it or not. Obviously, that was the era where the Brit invasion was really taking over, and obviously you can hear direct influences if you've listened to multiple songs by the Easybeats. I don't know if you have, but you can hear to me, you can hear like the Yardbirds and the Kinks, and obviously the Beatles. But you can hear those just where they're going with their musicality, and like to me, it's really impressive to have a band like that coming from like. When you're from Australia, it's like, Australia, because we're all really down to earth and we never think in terms of like we compete with everyone and we are the best. Like, I mean, I moved to America to realize that Americans are really sort of brought up to think that they can be present and they can be the best because you can. In America, it's this incredible sort of life that you can build something out of nothing and literally can be exposed to hundreds of millions of people to sell a product or whatever it is that you're doing. But in Australia, it's just like, good on you, just go get a job and be a nice bloke. Like that's the mentality that you're sort of brought up with, to not be too big or too full of yourself or whatever. Right. So to hear like the story of where this band came from and just the multiple legacies that they brought with them, it was just like when I started digging into it, it wasn't just like, oh, here's this one song, and then it was like, oh, this other song, oh, and that other song, and then how many songs, if there were any songs of theirs that you recognize. But like the fact that they are listed and considered to be like a one-hit wonder band, and then you look into their catalog and it's like there's Good Times, like there's just all these songs and you're like, oh man, that's nuts.
Here in the United States, we do think the world revolves around us, so therefore we consider this a one-hit wonder, even though they're not at all in Australia. But we don't care about that. We only care because honestly, I understand why I didn't know this song. It peaked at only like number 16 in the United States, and we're talking in like 1966.
Yeah, no.
So it makes sense that I didn't know it. I could have heard it along the way, but...
Let's take a quick second to pause because this kind of made me laugh. One of the things that I always look into when we're doing the research is obviously the year that this song was released, what were the best-selling singles of that entire year? Like, what were the songs that dominated the radio? So here's what was dominating the radio in America in 1966 when this song came out.
All right.
Frank Sinatra's Strangers in the Night, and then we had the Beatles' Day Tripper, followed by the Beatles' Yellow Submarine, followed by the Beatles' Eleanor Rigby.
I knew that's where this was going.
Followed by the Beach Boys' Good Vibrations.
Nice.
And the Beatles' Paperback Writers. So,
right, exactly. So that makes sense. I mean, they had some stiff competition from the Beatles, and you can't mess with the Beatles. And just in the same vein as the Beatles, the Easybeats, their entire catalog, their entire career is over the span of only 4 years.
Yeah.
Like they started their band, they rose to fame, and they broke up all in a matter of 4 years. Do you realize how fast that is? That is so... I mean, the Beatles is fast, too. The Beatles is 8 years.
Yeah, I was just going to say, it's not too different. Yeah.
Yeah, it's insane.
Well, they did. They happened that fast, and they will never be that fast ever again.
This was probably the biggest thing to make me appreciate how unique the Easybeats sound is, and as Katie said, like, how forward thinking it is. It was almost ahead of its time in a lot of ways. Is like when you look at the songs that were on the chart at the time that it hit 16, like Groovin' by the Young Rascals was the number 1 song in America. But like number 5 on the list was Respect by Aretha Franklin. And I think if you played me those 2 songs together, I would never guess they were on the charts at the same time. They seem like 2 completely different decades almost.
I know. That's nuts.
You got to keep that Motown stuff in mind too, because man, so many hits. There's stiff competition in the 60s, so it makes sense that maybe it would only rise to number 16.
Ready for a head-bangingly good time? Dive into the world of heavy metal with the Brutally Delicious podcast. Here, we don't just talk music. We welcome you into our heavy metal family. Join us for candid chats with legends and rising stars. We go beyond the typical interviews, exploring raw emotions and the life-altering impact of heavy metal. So whether you're a diehard metalhead or just curious, join our family and let the headbanging begin with the Brutally Delicious podcast.
Hi, this is Krista Makes, host of Krista Makes a Podcast. The theme of the podcast is songwriting. Each week, my musical guest picks a defining song from their career to discuss, critique, and analyze during the show. So please join me for some fun and insight into some of the greatest songs ever written and recorded. Listen and subscribe at soundtalentmedia.com.
Chris, while we're talking about the Easybeats, I was thinking of something else that's pretty easy.
What's that?
Men's hygiene.
Oh, good call, man. Once again, One Hit Thunder is being sponsored by Manscaped, who have made men's grooming an easy and simple process.
Exactly. Manscaped offers precision-engineered tools for your family jewels. In fact, Manscaped just launched their 4th-generation trimmer, the Lawnmower 4.0.
You heard that right. The 4.0. That's a perfect grade point average, Matt.
Join over 2 million men worldwide who trust Manscaped with this exclusive offer for you. 20% off and free worldwide shipping with the code CrazyTown at manscaped.com.
Yep, just butterfly over to their site, use the code CrazyTown. That will let them know that we sent you, and you'll get 20% off and free shipping with the code CrazyTown at manscaped.com. That's 20% off and free shipping. That's a great deal at manscaped.com. Use the code CrazyTown. I got a 4.0. I use it. I think it's amazing. You can unlock your confidence and always use the right tools for the job with Manscaped.
And now that we're done discussing the ease of taking care of that pubic hair, let's get back to the Easybeats.
Yeah, that's a good call. One more thing I want to say just about like the structure of this song that I think is so unique and so cool is that they intentionally, I talked earlier about the way the verses are that minor key with that kind of a dissonant lead and the weird backup vocals, that they were intentionally, because the song is about the work week and like, the grind and, having to work for the man and things like that. They wanted the verses to make you feel that way. And once I heard them talk about that and read about it, I was like, wow, that's so cool. And then you get that release when it's Friday. When you're at the chorus, you get that like joyful release. And that's so clever and unique and cool. And man, I really like this song. It's such a cool
I was
song.
really impressed, like looking into like the songwriting, because I always want to know. I was that person that grew up. I always wanted to know who wrote what and why and when and what else they did and who else they wrote with or where it went. So for me, like looking into this and going, like I knew, as I said, I knew that Stevie Wright had his own career, but to hear that like the first few songs that they recorded, they had a couple of hits in Australia and then started working with some people and obviously got them over to the UK to record with like one of the Kinks producers who'd also worked with a bunch of other bands. And they put out one song that I think the song that they currently had at that time wasn't doing too well, and they were like, what else you got? And they had the title for, we've got this song, Friday on My Mind, and like the producer was like, yup. Because it's like the other songs that they'd written like weren't doing so well because it was, I think it was George Young and Stevie Wright writing the songs at that time, and they were dominantly writing all the songs, and that's when Harry was switched in to write the songs with George instead, with George Young. So then it became Young and Vander doing, or Vander and Young, however, which way around you want to go. But they became the dominant writing team, and I thought that was really interesting to find out that switch had just happened, and that sort of was the explosion of their career, and obviously the explosion of them becoming this writing and production team that just never stopped.
Right. Hey, we didn't even get into George Young yet. for anybody who's listening, George Young, the older brother of AC/DC's Malcolm and Angus Young, which is insane. He also produced some of their earlier work. What a musical family.
I believe it was their first 8 records.
First 8 records? Wow. So AC/DC's career was a little bit longer than the Easybeats career.
Again, like I always tell people, like, you know, Australian, like all the best rock comes from Australia. I'm like, well, they're all Scottish people in Australia. It's like, it's nuts. And even like, obviously Colin Hay from Men at Work, AC/DC, we've got a bunch of other Scots as well in other bands. But like to have these 3 brothers, George being the older one and obviously being Malcolm and what's his face, that become like, oh, this is just my little brother's band. Like, you know, like it's just nuts.
When you're thinking about AC/DC and the length of that band, you have to factor in that like that band didn't even really truly break into the United States until their second vocalist. Like
I think it was Highway to Hell. Like that record broke them, and then obviously I think it was the record after that Brian Johnson joined. But just to hear that, like, this really, like, the origin of rock and roll really stemmed from this, like, in a big way, like one of the biggest bands in rock and roll is arguably AC/DC, and you really can't talk about rock and roll without mentioning them at all. Like, it's, to me, it's probably the biggest band in rock and roll, and to think that would, I mean, it may have happened, may this, may that, if, let's play the if game, but to know that it all sort of came from the record label saying, no, we want, you know, these songs aren't good enough, you know, you come, you know, and it was only because, you know, Harry Vander had just, his English had gotten so much better because he was a Dutch guy. It was like, well, you write the songs, and it was just becoming, and you can hear it obviously now, like these 2 guitarists doing these counterparts, like the rhythm and then the counterpart, and playing these big sort of roles, and you can see how that heavily influenced the AC/DC doing the thing. How could you not take influence from that, listening to these? I mean, that's really part of the AC/DC thing, having these block guitars but also these parts within them when it's relevant. Obviously the Easybeats is way more sort of Beatlesque in its, you know, in its origin, but you can hear it, like you listen to it and you're like, oh wow, that's the origin story for AC/DC, you know, undeniably.
Right.
But isn't that kind of the interest? I find that so interesting in music in general, is that like the most important bands were influenced by a lesser known band in so many cases. And like the examples that I always think of is like Jan and Dean. There wouldn't be a Beach Boys if there wasn't a Jan and Dean, or even the Beatles, who all said that Harry Nilsson was the best band that they've ever listened to. Like, there's all these dudes who are not household names, but like they are, you know, we always say that saying, or your favorite band's favorite band. Like
that's it, yeah. And like I mean honestly, like digging, like I picked this song and this band for a reason, because they're Australian, but because I knew there was a bigger story there, and like it took me to sort of dig into it to be like, oh holy crap, like all of those things, like just like I knew that they wrote Good Times, but like I forgot until I was watching Lost Boys, and it's like you could hear like there's an In Excess cover of Good Times in that, you know, I'm gonna have a good time tonight, you know, and I was just like, oh yeah, that song. And then it was like, okay, nice. Well, they wrote that. But speaking of Lost Boys, to go down the rabbit hole just for 2 seconds, did you guys watch the Tina Turner documentary recently?
No, I want to though.
The Tina Turner one is worth watching. I just went down I'm going down the Lost Boys rabbit hole just for 5 seconds because it's hilarious to me. But like, that's obviously that song was in that movie, but you know how there's that weird saxophone guy playing on the boardwalk in that one scene. That saxophone player plays in Tina Turner's band, because I was watching the documentary and I was like, that's that guy from that movie in that thing. Like, I just put all these pieces, like none of these dots connect, but I'm making them and they're forming some weird picture in my brain.
So while we're in the weird tangent of the Lost Boys, one of the other podcasts that I produce is an all horror movie podcast, and the last convention that we were at, that saxophone guy was a guest of honor at this convention and did a free concert.
Yes!
And I promise you, I did not see that man with a shirt for 3 straight days. He sat at his booth in just some leather pants and his ponytail and oiled up shirtless signing autographs. I was like, this dude is living the gimmick.
It was
I
living
love
the
it.
dream. It's amazing when we realize that those people exist. I just always remember. I remember names and faces, and they mean like I have this catalog in my brain of all these things that I know, and I never get to put them together because my brain just remembers the weirdest stuff. But yes, well, congratulations on having that wonderful moment.
I mean, this song, for a song that I was like when I heard it, I kind of recognized it, probably from just like riding in my parents' car, listening to like the oldies and classic rock station. But the amount of big name artists that have covered this song was impressive to me. We had David Bowie did it, Peter Frampton did it, Ben Lee did it, Blue Oyster Cult, Me First and the Gimme Gimmes, Bruce Springsteen and Squeeze have all done covers of this song. Like, that's crazy.
I watched Springsteen play it live. It was like 2014 when he played in Sydney, and it was awesome because he sang it real tough. It was good. And the whole crowd sang every word. And I was like, damn, those people had to be so psyched.
It's the best way to win over a crowd. Play one of their local songs, and you got them. You got them.
Well, apparently the David Bowie cover is the only one that the Easybeats actually enjoyed.
Wow.
Really upsetting to think that the Easybeats weren't into the Me First and the Gimme Gimmes cover, because I'm sure it was delightful.
But that's proof of what you were saying about like your favorite band's favorite band. Like all these people going, oh, but that's cool. That's cool.
Yeah.
Right. As a bassist, I got to talk about the bassist of the Easybeats real quick. His name is Dick Diamond, which totally sounds like a name from Boogie Nights or something, but that's not actually his name. He's a Dutch man, and his full name is Dingeman Adrian Henry Vanderslees, which is absolutely incredible name. He's one of the two Dutch guys in the band. Yep. And he was very shy. Like all the other guys were like rocking out. I mean, especially little Stevie. By the way, quick side note, there's only one little Stevie. We got the little Stevie over here, and it's not Bruce Springsteen's guitarist, and it's not this little Stevie. It's our little Stevie Wonder. Yeah. But you're all the way across the world. We'll let that slide. Anyway, back to Dick Diamond. He was very shy and really reserved on stage. He basically just stood there and played his bass. But his moment to shine was when in this song, Come and See Her, he had one vocal where the music stopped and he went like, I can't remember what the melody of it was, but it was basically like, come and see her, come and see her. That was his moment to shine. He was raised by Jehovah's Witnesses who did not approve of the fact that people looked up to his son. They did not like that. So that may have attributed to his, reserved nature. After the band was done, he just lived it up being Dick Diamond. He was in a legendary Australian band, and I don't think he did anything else musically after that. He just lived his best Dick Diamond life after that, which is cool.
That's a good little piece of history right there.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Do you guys want to go down a little bit of a sad, upsetting road for a second here?
We can do that.
About little Stevie. Do you know what happened to little Stevie by any chance, Katie?
I know he passed a few years ago. I don't know what happened.
So after the band had broken up, developed a heroin addiction in 1976 he was in a production of Jesus Christ Superstar.
Yeah,
so a psychiatrist administered a highly controversial treatment called deep sleep therapy, which was supposed to treat drug addiction through a combination of drug-induced coma and electroconvulsive therapy. And because of this, Stevie suffered brain damage and like lifelong after effects. I saw interviews with him as an old man, and you could tell. The scandal was exposed, and the doctor, Harry Bailey, committed suicide after that. Stevie did live until 2015. He died of pneumonia in 2015 at age 68. But I guess after this deep sleep therapy, Stevie was not the same. And, it's pretty sad. I mean, that was only, 5 or 6 years after we're looking at this fresh-faced, handsome, crazy frontman.
Yeah. Well, it's sad. I mean, that's obviously devastating to hear that. I didn't know about that. I knew that he went into drug addiction and alcohol abuse because a lot of musicians do. But like reading as well about Young and Vanda, they had debts to pay off from the band and just continued going back to the UK to tour to pay off their record label debts because obviously a lot of money had been spent. Like everybody knows, you live the dream until it all has to be paid back at some point.
Right.
So they just continued touring for, whatever it was, 4 or 5 years till they went back to Australia. And that's when they opened up their production studio, went back to their original producer that they'd worked with, Ted Albert, and started their thing. But like, it could have easily gone horrible for them too. I really think that it's like you get given these big shots in life as a musician and all that, and then it's just like, and it's over, and go away now. Like that's kind of how it is for a lot of rock stars, and I think it's obviously it didn't work out for Stevie Wright. Obviously he had that all those tragedies happened to him, but was amazing to hear the strange recovery story from the two production team members that they managed to get out. And I can't imagine what it's like to go over to a big country or a big city, have success, and then come back and be like, well, like, what do you do now? Like, what are you supposed to do? You've had this success and fame and whatnot, but the fact that they got out of it, paid off their debt, and started making records for their little brother's band.
Right. I mean, the George Young and Harry Vanda part of the story is
the happy
inspiring, and that's the happy part where I watched a little mini documentary about them, and those two, I mean, they looked great. Yeah. They were in their studio looking great, happy, like they're hit makers. So, so it's not all a sad story. And despite Stevie's rough patch, he did live a long time after that. I have to think that he had, some quality of life. He wasn't like completely out of it. I just think that
it's sad. It was a lot was taken from him. Yeah. That's clear.
Right. Coming away from this, I got to say, I'm an Easybeats fan now. You did it, Katie. You made me an Easybeats fan. I'm going to think of you every time now when I hear the Easybeats. You opened my eyes to a band. A lot of times, there's only been a few times on this show where I didn't know the song. I actually didn't know the Boomtown Rats song, and I was like, that song's okay. Had a cool story behind it. But this one, I needed to know about this band. This is really cool.
Well, you can't, it's like once you know a piece of rock history or whatever, you can't unknow it. And once you make all those connections, it's like, you're like, like I mean, I felt ridiculous from being Australian, not knowing this huge connection to AC/DC. Like, that's my people. I should know this. I should have been born and raised, and that should have been taught in school. The reason Australia is great is because Crocodile Dundee and the Easybeats.
And I will add to that, and this is a nice segue. Another reason Australia is great, even though you've been here for 10 years, is Katie Cole. And I want to talk about your career and what you have going on, because you have an impressive resume. First of all, it's the elephant in the room. You play in Smashing Pumpkins, which is pretty badass. And how did that first happen? I don't know. Tell us all about it. I want to know all about it.
Craigslist? No, I'm kidding.
Yeah. I wouldn't be surprised.
We had a mutual connection. My producer, Howard Welling, is a longtime collaborator of the Pumpkins and had worked on Adore and Machina and those records. He knew about me as an artist and asked, basically it started as me opening up a show for Billy Corgan, and then it became the following year after that, which was 2015, do I want to open up this sort of acoustic electro tour? And then it was, would you want to open up the show but also play some bass during the show too? And I'm like, yep. And then they extended onto that, playing the tour the year after that, where Jimmy Chamberlain came back into the picture and James Iha came back for some shows too. I've told this story quite a few times before, but I was playing bass on stage and watching this sort of reformation of this piece of rock history. I could see it. Like, I could see the look in the audience's eyes, and I could see what was happening on stage, and I'm like, this is really good. Because I really hadn't played together in a long time. It just kept growing from there, where the Pumpkins made another record with Rick Rubin, and we did an arena tour, and I got to play sold out Madison Square Garden and Wembley and all these huge places. And it's just continued on from there. We did festivals in 2019, and I did some opening shows for Billy Corgan in Europe. And like, I've been running my own career for obviously a long time, touring and putting out EPs and records. And I mean, my career started in Los Angeles when I first lived there. I'm in Nashville now, singing and opening up shows for Glenn Campbell, and I sang on one of his records. And I've just been doing this bit of everything, but having these amazing opportunities come my way and just sort of jumping on board of whatever I can do. Just basically saying yes to everything that I could that was, good.
That's absolutely what I was going to say. When I look at your resume, like, as a songwriter, you've written for Gloria Gaynor?
Yeah.
So you've written dance music. You sang on Dean Martin on the Christmas, on a Christmas song, and Cheap Trick? Mm-hmm. Is that right?
Well,
damn, Glenn Campbell, all over the spectrum is basically what I'm getting at. And Smashing Pumpkins, like, that's amazing. That's incredible.
Yeah, I've been really lucky. Like, I've learnt so much from saying yes to things that I'm not sure I can handle. And I just step into it and just sort of let go of the fear. And just sort of go for it, because you don't have a choice. Like, if you say yes to something, you are doing it. You are there. You just go and do the thing, and you worry about it afterwards. There's no time for stress in front of tens of thousands of people or whatever it is. You just go do a thing. Whether it's opening up a show in front of an audience that is not your audience at all. Like, I've managed to win over so many incredible Smashing Pumpkins fans during the 2016 tour. I did crowdfunding and then put out an EP during the 2018 tour. So, like, I've had these weird sort of parallel sort of events, and I'm actually crowdfunding at the moment. I just launched a brand new crowdfunder on Kickstarter that's doing really, really well. Like, I'm absolutely blown away by the fans, and they're just jumping in, and I'm just seeing so much love so early, and I'm just blown away.
Yeah, I'm very excited for this EP too, having watched the video, and I've started following you on Instagram, and just the covers that you've been posting, the cover of Blackbird specifically. Everyone who's listening, definitely go. The link to the Kickstarter campaign is in the show notes for this episode. Go and donate to Katie. Just a delightful guest, obviously, but also just a very cool, easy to talk to person.
It's because she's Australian. It's because she doesn't think she's great. She is great. She is great, but she doesn't think she's great.
Now you know. That's literally how we are. I always tell people, like, can't get it out of us. We're just gonna be like this forever. Like, we just don't get, I don't know.
Right.
We just don't get weird.
Yeah. Hey, before we go, we almost forgot to do this, but I think it's gonna be unanimous. We have to decide if the Easybeats brought the one-hit thunder or if it was a one-hit blunder. And I don't know. Is anybody going to say blunder? I don't think that's going to happen here, right?
No.
This is definitely a three-way thunder.
Yep.
It's thunder. Absolutely. Like, there's literally a lightning bolt through AC/DC, which they helped create. So it's like there is definitely thunder there.
Definitely thunder.
This has been One Hit Thunder. One Hit Thunder is hosted by Chris Fafalios of Punchline, Pack, and Another Cheetah, and produced by Matt Kelly of the Geekscape Network. This week's guest, Katie Cole, has a Kickstarter for her new EP. Be sure to donate using the link in the episode description. Underneath me, you're hearing Maybe I'm Wrong off the Punchline album Just Say Yes. Visit punchline.com for merch and more updates. If you have any interest in podcasting, visit WeKnowPodcasting.com for how Chris and I can help make your show sound as professional as possible. And let us know your thoughts on the show by emailing us at onehitthunderpodcast@gmail.com. Make sure to rate, review, and subscribe to us on your favorite podcasting apps. And tune in next week for another episode of One Hit Thunder.
You're listening to the Geekscape Network.
Ready for a head-bangingly good time? Dive into the world of heavy metal with the Brutally Delicious podcast. Here, we don't just talk music. We welcome you into our heavy metal family. Join us for candid chats with legends and rising stars. We go beyond the typical interviews, exploring raw emotions and the life-altering impact of heavy metal. So whether you're a diehard metalhead or just curious, join our family and let the headbanging begin with the Brutally Delicious podcast.
What's up, everybody? I am Finn McKenty, host of the Punk Rock NBA podcast, part of the Sound Talent Media podcast network. My podcast is all about doing what you love for a living, and every week I sit down and talk to people who have done exactly that. For example, musicians like Tommy from Between the Buried and Me, Matt from Periphery, Lil Lotus and Shinigami, among many others, photographers, artists, designers, YouTubers like Glenn Fricker and Sarah Dici, and I unpack exactly how they got to where they are today with the goal of helping you do the same. So if that sounds cool, you can listen and subscribe at soundtalentmedia.com, and I'll see you there.